false claims of Kaushik Roy regarding Pathans in British Indian Army artillery in the First World War. Now, this is a short podcast based on my book Political Consequences of First World War on British Indian Army's class composition and myths about class composition. This is available on the Amazon books. As you can see, this short book deals with political consequences of soldiers from various ethnicities on the recruitment policy of British India. This scribe is of the view that political loyalty was the ultimate factor in British recruitment policy in India starting from 1858. This book deals with First World War in particular. We will start by examining each infantry unit of the British Army in 1914 and post-World War, the British Indian Army. Firstly, there are nonsense myths that have been repeated and persist. Major General Fazl Mukim Khan of Pakistan Army fallaciously and totally incorrectly claimed that there were no all-Muslim units in the British Indian Army, pearls of absolute nonsense. This was totally false claim. There were many all-Muslim units between 1890 and 1914 and some till 1947. What Fazl Mukim was trying to imply was that Muslims were regarded as most dangerous and untrustworthy by the British. Absolute nonsense. The opposite was true. Interestingly, the opposite is true. For example, Sikhs dominated the fighting arms like infantry as late as end of First World War, but were reduced after 1918 as they exhibited politically defiant anti-British behavior in some units in the First World War. On the other hand, Punjabi Muslims were most loyal in the First World War, and thus Punjabi Muslim quota in infantry was increased and exceeded Sikh quota only after the First World War had ended. This was not due to any fighting qualities but pure political loyalty. Some may call it docility. Such was the British mistrust of Sikhs that all Sikh units were mixed with Punjabi Muslim companies. Two Pakistani origin authors are in lead in holding Guinness Book records of making false claims. An Indian self-styled expert, Kaushik Roy, deserves Guinness Book record in churning baseless nonsense. Like in a book on the First World War, he falsely claimed that there were Pathans in British Indian Army artillery at Gallipoli, a case of absolute lies, factual. On page 105 in the book on the Indian Army in First World War, Kaushik Roy starts making absolutely nonsense statements, false as well as intellectually, criminally ridiculous, like he introduces Pathans in British Indian Army mountain artillery, whereas they were strictly banned from artillery. Pathans were strictly banned from artillery, as the famous classic British officer's book, Graham's book on Indian mountain artillery, proves. They were strictly banned from artillery. If Kaushik Roy had taken care to read the book History of Indian Mountain Artillery, he would have been wiser. Now Kaushik Roy on page 105 of his book of Indian Army in First World War claims that 26th Jacob Mountain Battery had Sikhs and Hindus is absolute had Pathans and Punjabi Muslims is absolutely ridiculous. As Kaushik Roy says on page 105, 26th Jacob's Mountain Battery, while the 21st had mostly Pathans and Punjabi Muslims, the 26th Jacob Mountain Battery had Sikhs and Hindus. Absolute nonsense as far as the 21st Cohort Mountain Battery is concerned. Kaushik's claim that it had Pathans and Punjabi Muslims is absolute nonsense. If Mr. Kaushik Roy had read the British Indian Army list carefully, he would have known that each mountain battery had 50% Punjabi Muslims and 50% Sikh and other Hindus. As you can see, this is from the Indian Army list. Indian Artillery, as the Army list says, composition of each battery, half Punjabi Muslims and half Sikh and other Hindus. So Pathans, there was no question that the British would let the Pathans come near the British Indian Army artillery. Absolute nonsense churned by Kaushik Roy in his book on the First World War. In the next podcast, we will deal with the 8th Rajputs, how this battalion's pure Hindu Rajput, non-Punjabi Hindu Rajput composition was tempered, and this unit was diluted after First World War, as my grandfather's elder brother humorously called it, diluted, by changing its class composition and introducing Punjabi Muslims in this battalion, 8th Rajputs. In the next podcast, we will discuss.